Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's been another week. It's been another dry week in Western New York, and it's another episode of the Regeneration Podcast. Michael Martin, you're a CSA fan. You're also a CSA provider. You're a CSA everything. How's it going? Are you winding up your season? What's going on?
Last day's tomorrow.
Oh, really? Tell me more. What are the things still growing?
Oh, there's a lot still growing because it's been so mild in September, and today was 82 or something. So we never know, because you never know when you're going to get the frost. So we try to gauge when we stop to right around where the frost date is. But now we're going to end up with a lot of extra produce for the next few weeks, like lots and lots of cabbage and daikon. And
Doesn't that just equate with lots and lots of sauerkraut, or am I missing something?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we can eat 400 pounds of sauerkraut.
Oh, you haven't talked to a German.
I like sauerkraut.
Yeah.
But Bonnie's into fermenting stuff. So she just fermented some. It was called Summer of Love Kraut, which has cabbage and summer squash, carrots, and lavender in it.
I was going to say, if it's Summer of Love and Michoacan and Acapulco Gold, things like that. Anyhow, it's good to see you, my friend, and some people who are watching us on the YouTube version, reminding people that we're on YouTube, of course. We call it the Regeneration Podcast because it started out as more of a podcast thought. I guess we always knew we were going to do both.
As you
find us on Spotify.
Because we got swag.
Yeah. Michael and I, Jeff, both have swag, but it's just our kids make us stuff. They find the logo. But anyhow, I want to welcome, I just mentioned his name. Our guest today is Jeff Bilbro, and Jeff is somebody that I saw live in person before I got to know him. And then we got to know each other a bit over something we'll talk about. And now so glad he's on the podcast. I'm going to, I know all this, but I'm going to read what we have on, I think, Google Books about Jeff, just in case I missed something. Because I know he's at Grove City and he hasn't been there all that long. So I figured this was up to date. Jeff Bilbro, PhD from Baylor. I didn't know that. Kudos to you. Is the editor-in-chief of Front Porch Public. That's how I know him. An associate professor of English at Grove City College. He's also the author of Loving God's Wildness, The Christian Roots of Ecological Ethics in American Literature, and Virtues of Renewal, Windleberry Sustainable Forms, and co-author with Jack Baker of Windleberry in Higher Education, Cultivating Virtues of Place, and most recently, the author of, I got something here on my, the author of Reading the Times, a literary and theological inquiry into news. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Front Porch. But first of all, Jeff, welcome. And did that bio miss things that are super important to you? I know you have a family, and that's probably the most important thing.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I suppose publicly, it's you hit the high points and the low points. So yeah, it's good to be talking with you guys.
Mm-hmm. I want to thank Jeff and Michael because Michael's the editor of a journal, of course, of Jesus the Imagination. And I should have done it this year. I don't know what I was thinking. One other issue I didn't have an entry was when my oldest daughter got married. But Michael has had the misfortune of editing me, and so has Jeff Bilbro. I've never called myself a writer, but I started putting some words down to paper. But I'm still that guy that when I type, I don't catch myself when I leave two spaces after a period, when my comma is outside the quotation marks. And I always feel so bad because I submit things knowing that I don't know what it is. I can't see my own mistakes, and I know they're there. So I apologize to you both, and it's something you two could commiserate about.
All right. Well, Mike, all I can say is 2 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys.
Okay, thank you. And Jeff, I'll offer the same penance and thank you again for what you've had to do. Front Porch Republic, Jeff. Michael's familiar with it. I'll tell you how I became familiar with it is that many, many moons ago, I saw the name Bill Kaufman, known to not everybody on this podcast, but known probably to many. I saw him writing articles in the magazine Chronicles of American Culture. And there was something of a tone about that guy in particular. There was a lot of brilliant people who wrote for him. But Bill, there was something about a tone. And he would write about New York City through the virtues of its boroughs. He wanted to see upstate secessionism in New York. And it wasn't just that kind of preferential option for smallness and separation. But I could tell he was just an amazing human being, which he was. And then I realized he lived about 40 miles west of me in Batavia, New York, and I live south of Rochester. And so I got to know him. I more or less stalked him, and we had lunch, and he showed me all around Batavia where his relatives were buried. And I used to ask Jeff, and Mike would get, or I would ask Bill, and Mike would get this, because Mike's a doer. He's never had an idea that he doesn't try to embody. But I was always holding our friend Bill to say, like, what are you doing? This seems like something new. At that time, I would have said Bill Kaufman's dispatches for the Muckdock Gazette and something like Rod Dreher, early Rod Dreher Country Cons. To me, that felt like something new. And Crunchy Cons did capture it. You could be for organic food and so forth, and be against imperialism and be for your hometown. And I wanted that to get out there because it seemed to defy political left and right. And of course, through Bill, I met, something of a godfather, a Windleberry. And then at one point he said there was this thing called Front Porch starting up. And I was probably a year late to the punch. So maybe we hadn't seen each other. And it's gone through a couple of editors, but I don't think anybody as long, Jeff, or anybody is quite as dedicated as you. So I want to thank you for what you're doing. That history, where would you see the history of the website? We encourage people to read it. At that time, it seemed to be very unique. Do you think it's still unique? What service, how did you get drawn to it? What service was it providing? What was its niche? What was its message? What do you think it's doing now?
Yeah, all good questions. I mean, I think introducing it with Kaufman is a good way to go because he's certainly one of the, he's one of the sort of initial cohort, and his voice, his such a distinct voice, as you say. Yeah, it's definitely what we're trying to do at FPR, although nobody can write like Bill. But I mean, it started in 2008, 2009, right in the aftermath of the Great Recession, or whatever they want to call it. And the concern that nobody in Washington, D.C. was actually addressing the root problems. It's kind of a political duopoly, and no one wants to think about what if some things are not only too big to fail, but quite simply too big. And it's always been idiosyncratic, different people with different interests writing. Not everybody's going to agree on everything, which I think is it's a lively place, right? It's a real front porch.
Yeah.
But it's, people are drawn there by their commitment to place, to localism, and to notions of liberty that are rooted in limits rather than in the absence of any constraint. So it's a different kind of liberty. So yeah, I mean, I think since we've started, on the one hand, you take a look at Washington, D.C., and not much has changed. Dysfunction still reigns. But I think there's more of an awareness maybe than even 12, 15 years ago that the current status quo is broken, and that you can either butt your head against the wall and get frustrated and angry, or you can turn closer to home and do something constructive and tend a place and a community and a people whom you actually have affection for.
Now,
So,
where do you see that? And what
right back
kind of demographic do you see that, Jeff?
I mean, I think the rise of Windleberry Readers, everywhere I go, I've run into Windleberry Readers from across the political spectrum who care about food, care about communities. So I think he's done a lot to kind of create a community. And I see it among people in homeschooling, classical school movements who are maybe frustrated with different issues in the public school, but are trying to not just get angry, but actually build something better for their communities. So I see a lot of common ground with that movement, which is really taking off. Yeah, so that's two. I mean, it's still vast minority, right? But I think the awareness is growing.
Yeah, it's. I mean, because I live in a small town, in Michigan, and the father of 9 children, the youngest of whom is 13 or about to be 13. And so we're familiar with those homeschooling groups that you're talking about, where we do meet people like us who are raising animals and most of their own food, and it's kind of I would say a loose confederation. But it seems to me, and tell me if this is what you see, that it seems to me that a lot of that is hampered by, part of me wants to call it like the Rod Dreher bunker mentality, hide the kids in the house, honey. But the other part, it seems to not have enough willpower to become something. I wouldn't call it. I mean, I hate the idea of a movement, but
that gets into me asking Bill Kaufman all the time, like, what are we going to do? Right.
To become more than just these scattered families who might or might not, interact with each other. And one of the ways we tried to do that on our farm is we just had it last week, Michaelmas. We had Michaelmas Festival as a harvest festival. And it was nice because we had a lot of little kids here this time, which was nice. So when we did St. Michael and the Dragon, but I always feel like there's, we can't just get any traction. It's just something doesn't seem alive yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think Windleberry says he wouldn't be a part of any community that would have him as a member or any institution. I think there is something about this hunger for localism and community in place that resists institutionalization. So that's part of it. FPR, we've talked over the years, like, should we get serious, raise funds, try to get bigger? Because right now it's basically, 3 guys in a garage, more or less. And we keep coming back to, like, well, that would actually lose the very flavor of what we're trying. Like, if you start chasing money, if you start wanting to operationalize.
No, I'm not talking about chasing money or hosting a conference or anything.
Yeah.
I mean, just organically that I think, well, maybe it's that we really don't have, as much as we know we don't have, the willpower to create a community.
Yeah, and all the institutional forces are right against it.
Right, that's true.
So, but I think it happens, or doesn't happen, in local places in different fashion. Right? You talk about your festival. We were at a neighbor's house with probably 100 or 200 people for a fall party pig roast dance last week. So it happens, but it's not replicable, or it's not a visible mass movement thing.
Yeah, some people, when they say living well is the best revenge. And I wonder, Michael, because did I mention, I was asking Bill what we're going to do. Our friend Guido Preparata, I mean, he's always thinking about it either changes the world, currency in its phenomenological essence, or it's like nothing. And then Michael, who's a doer. But I wonder, a huge image for me when I write on the divine feminine, or just something I still love is the affiliation with Front Porch Republic, is, let's say this thing, Sophiology, the bottom up, the localism, the people first. Let's say it works like the divine feminine. It's a well bubbling up. And it's that thing kind of slowly, but from a million places, bringing a lot down around it, and then we start to see the new forms more clearly, and I'm not saying I'm with that. And I think, we can keep on throwing up these forms to see what smacks. I think Jeff gets at something that, and what Guido's finding out is, like, literally everything. When you get into reforming currency, every bright thinker gets poached off by the Bank of London, right? Before you can even, before you can even get the first thing going. And so I wonder, Michael, is that part of it, or does that resonate with you at all, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that's all the institutional gravity is around things that scale and that you can, build a brand around and raise funds and do stuff. And if you're intentionally trying to embody a different form, it's going to be ad hoc and it's going to be messy. So I wrestle with that question. I've thought about it a lot. I don't have a great answer, but I guess I've become more resigned to that, that it's not going to be a kind of symmetrical. Localism is not going to take on the same forms that various powerful constituencies take on in terms of politics or institution building.
Interesting. Michael, keep on. I think it's a very interesting subject. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I just don't know. I don't know what to do either. But I mean, you just do what you can.
Is it kind of an anti-consequentialism in a sense?
I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to. And I think for me, the danger is, and I don't to think of it as a movement or something like this, that's not even what I'm thinking at all. But, and I wonder if it's like what Rudolf Steiner said when somebody went to him and said, what is with all these people? You know, you got all these people, they hear all this great stuff, they have all these insights that they can act upon, but they can't do anything. And he said, well, it's a matter of nutrition. The food we have now does not provide the kind of forces that people need to
Is
follow.
that really what he said?
Live.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Huh.
And I think that's part of what I see is that there's a, you know, it's a, well, my house. So my house was built in 1865 and it was built mostly by the guy who lived here. I don't know how he did this. And he, you know, he hand hewed all the beams in the barn and in the house and did all this stuff, right? Like a giant, like somebody from the time of legends, you know what I mean?
Interesting.
And I got, you know, I'm like, can you go, you know, with a chainsaw? I'm like, I work with a chainsaw for an hour or two. I'm like, I need to take a nap. Whereas something's weird. And I think we're so immersed in it, we can't even describe how weird it is. And
I
how
think you described that so great. Something's weird. I'd never heard you talk about something like that guy who built your house. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that certain social communal muscles atrophy, that when they're not practiced, you lose the capacity to gather. It's too much work. People are too busy. It's much easier to get amused or entertained from a screen. So it just becomes much harder. There's a lot more inertia to overcome, to gather with one another and do things, build things, make things in your community.
I could add one other theory too, is that like if you just took Oswald Spengler at semi-face value, and you know, either of you could disagree because I haven't read the whole thing, but you would say that, like, let's say it's not this portion of America's time, right? Let's say it's happening in Russia, that Cathedral of the Armed Forces, if you ever saw that, you know, it was just like there seemed to be a will to get things done. When you go to like Vietnam, I visited my daughter there, they can throw up a public work project that would blow your mind in a month. It would take us 20 years. Of course, that's bureaucracy, but what if, do you think, you know, Michael, you think about the land and the role of the land, and I'm basically obsessed with that subject. You know, what if it's just not the energy isn't coming from this part of the world right now, but it's coming, you know, in the great folds of Russia, like Spengler said.
Well, you know, I think where I read something that was it a saint or some mystic that predicted that the future would come out of Russia. And
a lot of people have said it.
Well, but what I think it is, I don't think it's that well,
We're
I mean,
decadent, right?
You could say the West is dying because it is. But I mean, you think about when this land was first settled by Europeans, right? Those were like the guy who did this house, who built this house and cleared the land around this farm. It was a giant. You know, he was like Achilles or something. You know, he was a he was a mythic figure as far as I'm concerned.
He was Grass Lake's Paul Bunyan.
Well, they had them. They're all over the place out here, and but I do notice, like for instance, this Sunday at a place about a mile away, they call it Pioneer Days, where it's like a living history kind of museum deal. It's these old buildings that they saved and moved over there, like a mill and whatever. And there's some really excellent like retired history teachers who give outstanding presentations and talks, just kind of extempore, to people who come around to find out about how, you know, what the French were doing when they were here, the Indians were doing, etc. But what I don't see, and this, I don't know, we're getting way off topic, but it's almost like the will to live. Will to, you know, like Thoreau, right? To suck the very marrow out of life. And I don't see that. And I try, I mean, it's kind of a romantic notion, and I mean that in a good way, that you know, this desire to live a full life. where I don't, that's, and as Jeff pointed out with screens and what and so forth, it's much easier to be entertained and pacified by something that's passive rather than active. Even today, I mean, or no, yesterday I was teaching a class, and so it was a humanities class, and I showed them a video of one of Bach's Brandenburg concertos, and I asked if any of them played a musical instrument. Not one, not one. And it used to be when I first started teaching 20, 30 years ago, quarter of the kids, half of the kids would at least have some familiarity with it. Nobody anymore. So there's a lack of will to do things with the hands, or to devote oneself to a craft, or to know how to do things.
This will tie into Jeff's book in some way, but I also want,
what I see kids doing, they don't do things that are engage their souls. They do things that they think engage their brand, right? So the only thing that some of the kids I have who are, say, athletes in school, their whole thing is about working out and doing that kind of stuff and training, but never about anything related to the kind of intrinsic and extrinsic value you have in learning craft, or as my favorite hobby, Mike, making mead. Right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think you're right. I also think that there is a deep hunger among many young people for the crafts. There's a kind of reaction that's always going to be a minority reaction, but I have a lot of students, in the margins of my classes, get together and they have the reading groups, or they have activities, the outing club or whatever, that want to read these guys, want to learn these things, want to tap the maple trees on campus, want to do things, because I think many of them feel like something's missing, and
more unique at Grove City than other places, though, Jeff?
Maybe, absolutely. It's hard to know what's typical, but and there's more here certainly than my previous institution. So it's encouraging, but it's definitely not like the mass.
Now, where is Grove City?
Western Pennsylvania.
But it doesn't take any government money, Michael. Am I right, Jeff?
That's true, yeah.
So it gets these engaged families. They have a philosophy of life and so forth. So it's like Liberty College in that sense. And Grove City has been, it's had some Von Mises stuff there over the years, right? But again, it's the students I've known who've gone there, they went there for a reason, and they're very serious about what they're doing. It's got kind of a Hillsdale vibe, Mike. Yeah. And you saw how you received at Hillsdale, right?
In fact, at Michaelmas, we had some Hillsdale peeps.
Okay.
And in fact, the new Jesus the Imagination, whenever it comes, it's out, but I haven't seen mine yet. It's got at least 3 people from Hillsdale in there.
Yeah.
And I just got an email from a Hillsdale guy who was here back for when I did my biodynamic farming and gardening course back in the spring. He wanted to know what he should sell his turkeys for. And I said, hey, I didn't raise any turkeys this year. Can I get one?
Now, Jeff, tell me, so we've kind of said where Front Porch came from. Where do you think, I think it's caught on with a lot of people. How do you assess its success, and where do you see evidence of its spread? It kind of relates to what we were saying. Is it a movement or something? And how do you see its future? And then I want to move on to your book.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about, do we want to make this a thing? And we've decided, at least at this point, not really. But, we have a print journal that has about 1,000 subscribers. And we have we get this conference we have coming up later this month with Paul Kingsnorth as the keynote. That's sold out. We had to get a bigger venue. That's sold out. So, there's people who care about this, and it's kind of a networking thing, right? There's like pockets of people who really like FPR, tell their friends, and they're FPR people. So when I go to these conferences, or anytime I'm traveling across the country speaking or whatever, there's always people who come up to me and are like, FPR, they're my people. And makes it rewarding, makes it pretty fun.
Yeah. I still want to host one of those kind of porches with Bill. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
When I was working at the monastery, they have a great old kind of place. It's one of the retreat houses with these huge columns. And then I think when I was going to just say, let's choose a date, then COVID came and the whole thing. But so thanks for that on Front Porch. And moving towards your book on the news a little bit, how has that been received so far? And well, let me say this as kind of a teaser, because I think once you kind of get this inversion, a lot of like your book is going to come to light. But you say like, do we belong more to our media places than our community? And you're writing about this when he's talking about things like, cruises. If you're a National Review fan, you're taking a cruise in the Mediterranean. Chronicles itself, I'll make an exception for this. They would have a conference in Charleston. You'd go and you'd see historic things, different than a cruise.
Yeah.
So again, do we belong more to our media places than our community? Describe like media places. Why'd you write the book? Tie that into why you wrote the book, and a little bit of an intro to the book.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about these ideas for a long time because I'm actually now just finishing a book on 19th century American changes in print culture and parallels to today, and the sort of news media explosion that happened in the antebellum years, and in many ways contributed to the partisan landscape. But so that was kind of on my mind, and then seeing all my students really struggle, I think, with how to navigate their smartphones, social media, the news, seeing, people in my generation, my parents' generation also get sucked up into these media vortices. So I just wanted to take a step back and kind of think, how could Christians committed to loving their neighbors, committed to their places, their communities, how might they reimagine a relationship to the media? So as that example you talked about, Michael, I think, so many people I meet identify more with their political
branding, or eating raw eggs.
Yeah,
like this, right?
Like that's their, they have this social media fandom and they share the same articles, and that's like their tribe. And it's not entirely negative, but it can be really unhealthy. And it's like a sort of, we live lonely lives, we're hungry for a community, and that's a substitute. Yep. But I would love to see it flipped, where we belong where we are, and we build community amongst our neighbors, and then it's out of those relationships that we try to make sense of what's happening around us in the broader world, and gauge the significance of things, not by, whether it's viral on our social media feeds, but by whether it really calls forth the response from us and from our neighbors.
It's a heavy inversion, don't you think? It made me think of Thomas Aquinas, who said, like, we have to love those things that are above us and know those things that are below us. So if you love, say, alcohol, until you can get those, if you love something that you needed to know, I've used that with the occult with students a lot. Like, the occult's a real thing, but you're going to go in there and you're going to become fascinated and love it. Where, like, sure, there's some people who try to know it. But when we get these inversions, or it's again, what Ian McGilchrist is doing with the left brain and right brain, he's saying, this whole thing happened. It's if the left brain dominates the right brain, it's this institutional inversion. It's not like finding balance. I always think with I work for a diocese. Is the technostructure left brain thing, is that dominant, or the right brain? And everybody says, oh no, it's kind of like, we just need balance, a little bit here, like quadrants. I'm like, no, this isn't a balance question. We're not going to put more couple pennies on the scale. We have a huge problem. I remember, like, Ibn Arabi, how is that pronounced? He once said, it's one of these, or in our country, which came first, the nation state or the confederation, right? These are things, they change a lot of things in their wake. Jeff, that's very interesting, that they're identifying with this, as Michael called, brands first. Yeah. And so instead of having news come out of our community, what are the possibilities for an inversion? Where do you see hope? And then I know that's almost a big concluding question, but we're going to get in the weeds after that. Yeah,
I mean, again, that's why I talked. So speaking of hope, Barry has this line. It's not unique to Barry. I think Christopher Lasch does similar things. A lot of people talk about this, but that the optimist has expectation that things are going to get better. Pessimist has expectation things are going to get worse. But the person of hope has no expectation things are going to get better. He has hope because hope's a virtue, and you got to have it. And what you need for hope is the possibility for doing good work where you're at. You don't need the expectation that this work is going to be efficacious. you need the possibility for doing good work. So I think in the book, looking for hope in this area, I don't expect that some governmental law or some technological fix is going to radically reshape our media ecology and make it so that it spreads truth and light. I don't think that's possible. But I do think that there are plenty of opportunities for us as individuals, but primarily on like the family, church, school, those kinds of levels, that we can try to develop practices that reorient, as you're talking about, reinvert our relationship to the media. So yeah, I talk in there about learning a craft. Like, what would it mean if you form habits of attention that are required by cultivating a skill and becoming excellent at something like playing an instrument or cooking or gardening or woodworking, and then let those habits of attention carry over to how you attend to the news media. I think that would be transformative. So things like that we can do that then hopefully provide us a different posture from which to approach the media.
Yeah,
That's
and I
right.
think
Michael, you're thinking, yeah.
I think what you raise here. So the word, that I think often about the church, and I think maybe Jeff, you meant the parish.
Yeah, more of that
rather than the church, because today I saw on Twitter that the church was trending, and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
So, and I looked, and it was an oh no moment, but even that, I mean, even the church, and this is, we saw this through COVID and stuff, was corrupted, right, by what I've been calling the archons, whoever it is behind the scenes, and I was thinking about this whole thing that was going down with the Pope this week. And I kept thinking about Guido Preparata when he was, because all I'm hearing is World Economic Forum talking points coming down out from the chair of St. Peter, and talk about a dumpster fire. But that for me, as Mike knows, that's what compelled me to almost 3 years ago now to take matters into my own hands. I'm a doer, right? And we started to do house church first out of duress, and then out of necessity, and then out of love.
Yeah.
And people think, are you still Catholic? Well, yes. But it's come to terms, right? What do you mean by that word? What do you mean by the church? And we know that both of those words, as so many of the words we use, once you start to scratch at them a little and try to come to terms about what they mean, they fall apart into a kind of glittering generality that it's meaning it's an idol. I kind of projected a part of my being onto this word, and I had a lot of belief in it, but I didn't really know what it meant. And then we're compelled, and I think anybody who's honest and who's being intellectually honest, and it's not just with these two words, but as we're talking with community and even that, right? So how can we keep it alive, keep it real? In fact, cite Rudolf Steiner one more time. So I don't know where I picked up this story, but it's a good one, that he told somebody once that he wished he could have a different word for anthroposophy every day, because people would hear that and they'd have an idea what it meant when they came to it. And he was like, I feel like I have to have a new name for it every day, which is not practical, but I feel that way about words like the church and the community. You know what I mean? And Catholicism.
Absolutely.
How do you keep it alive? How do you keep it from ossifying and turning into a concept?
Yeah, I mean, you got to practice them, right? It's like what Barry says about marriage. It needs to be practiced more than it needs to be defended. And so many people who want to defend these concepts don't always practice the reality that they aspire to name. So community lives in places it doesn't live in a book.
Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I was thinking of the again, Illich on the inevitable corruption of that thing, the church. But that you're doing it, Michael. That's where I'm in my recent thinking. Bonhoeffer was talking about it. religionless Christianity. I still think for me, I don't know, I think religionless church. So for me, religion is kind of problematic right now. Doing something in place A, so that, when we've been separated from our hospitals and our schools and we're left in the church, it becomes kind of in too high of a percentage that's not kind of corrupting of the OCD, by the OCD, for the OCD, and in the Catholic Church, I think we're seeing a lot of that. Anyhow, the notion of church, I think you're right, Michael, we need a different name, but I'm hanging my hat on that, like a religionless church, which
Right.
is something like the goal of, Front Porch in one sense. Other thoughts on that, Jeff?
No, I mean, I agree with you that it's so often, as Illich says, it's when the best, right? When the most holy and cherished things that are goods as creatures become institutionalized, they too often serve their opposite. And I don't think that there's a recipe to avoid that. It's a sort of continual requirement to renew and to
That's
go
almost
back.
Bergiev, Michael. That again is objectification. That's that's the theory's ossification and so forth. Jeff, with something else. Oh, I'll say, Michael, that I read the apostolic exhortation from Pope Francis that just came out this morning. And because when I read about the synod, I just know synodality is the future, right? Bottom up. We have to invest in that. If this first one was hijacked by German bishops or some, infernal World Economic Forum relationship to the Vatican, the exhortation is pretty interesting. It begins to me with technocratic speak, only to lambaste the technocratic structures 1,000 times, but it's still, in the beginning, it's still problematic for me. It's looking for a slam dunk on huge man-made climate change in its opening paragraphs. And he's already going to want 60% of the crowd reading it's going to want a little more nuance than that. He just goes, it can no longer be denied. And it kind of sells the farm right there. But I think it was more interesting than I thought.
Well, here's the thing, though. You say bottom up, and I mean the up is the problem, right?
Right.
The up is the problem, and as we mentioned before on the cast here, is that in fact, I've been working. I don't know if I told you this, Mike. I'm working on an introduction for Novalis's Christianity or Europe. You can't help but read that and see.
Very familiar with it. Yeah.
His valorization of medieval Catholicism, but it's not that. I mean, it's kind of religion without religion, like you're getting at.
Isn't
right?
that what that's what our friend Stephen Clark accused most of Sophiology doing, taking something that's supposed to be bottom up from the earth and kind of throwing it out there in the ether and giving it a feminine connotation. And he thinks it's deeply confusing. And I think we see that too, that synodality, we kind of throw it out there in the ether as a different way in kind of the overworld. But don't you think there's, Stephen Clark was saying he thinks a lot of Sophiology is just people taking this true bottom up, because the see, judge, act mechanism of synodality is the future. Yeah.
Well, I agree, but I think what they're doing is they have the initial insight, right? The intuition, but then try to put it at the service of the up.
Probably. Yeah.
Right. And then it gets, it just becomes a wax statue.
I think that's going to happen with the synod. I think in Latin America,
I think it is. I have no hope for it at all, because it's the simulacra of localism. It's not localism.
Hope springs eternal.
It's like this is the same bullshit they do in academia, where we used to call it at the school I was at before it abruptly closed because they had a deal with a nonprofit that they said we were a shared governance model. And I kept telling my faculty members, my colleagues, I said, it's only shared governance as long as it's okay with those guys.
Yeah,
as long as they get from us what they want. As soon as they get another offer, they're going to throw that out the window, which is exactly what they did. Right. And I think that's what you're going to see with this gesture at synodality. I don't think it has anything to do with reality. It's a way to preserve the status quo.
Could be. Jeff, any thoughts on that?
I have not been following. I mean, I know what's going on, but I have.
I had a lot of coffee today, but
no, you're on. Jeff, I want to ask you about, again, your book, the you're looking at the news through the lens of what it does to our attention. You're looking at the news through what it, the distinction between kairos and chronos, what it does to our reckoning of time. And you're looking at, a sense of belonging. And the sense of belonging, again, it's like one of these Lashian or Elitchian, where the community gets confused with the crowd and so forth. Tell us why you structured the book that way, kind of what you're hoping the reader can pull out of it.
Yeah, I guess just sort of stepping back and trying to think about the phenomenon of the news. Those were the three topics that struck me as most pertinent, trying to define what the news is, how it operates. And so I tried to think about the ways that it structures our attention, the ways that it teaches us to tell time, and the ways that it constitutes community. And in all those cases, I try to start off by thinking, here are some of the malformative ways that it does that. And then I tried to look at the various Christian thinkers to provide an alternative account. And then I try to imagine practices that might embody that alternative Christian account.
Now, hey, Jeff, do you trace the genealogy of news? I mean, like professional news in your book?
I mean, I gesture to that. I talk about some of the history, but not entirely. Because there have been histories of the news, and I'm trying to write a book that hopefully like equips people to deal with what we have. But it is a fascinating story, and that's part of what the book I'm wrapping up right now is about, like especially in the 19th century, where the news becomes
a player.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking
Belloc saw it all in the free press. He saw so much of this, right?
Yeah.
Well, my doctorate is in 16th and 17th century English literature, and I keep when you talk about the news, I keep thinking of this play by Ben Jonson. Do you know it? The Staple of News.
No.
Oh, you probably need to,
I'll check it out.
It's super. Ben Jonson is really funny, but it's really comedic about how how the news, the meaning of the newsstand is news, is how when this stuff comes out, it changes society. And it really, even in his book, in his play, you see it start to divide society into what do they call them? What do they call it in advertising? Something groups. What's it called?
Well, they also call it schizogenesis in that book, The Dawn of Everything, those two anthropologists, where certain realities are kind of meant to divide. It's right there in Balzac's great novel. About the, trying to think of the name, Lucien Leuwen, I think. No, that's a Stendhal novel. Oh gosh, Balzac, one of his major novels was about news in Paris, and it shows it kind of just jacking up these divisions. It definitely does work that way. When you're Jeff, when you're talking, and Michael's going to have a lot of correspondence with this because he's always building the liturgical year. Tell us about your, the chronos kairos distinction.
Yeah, I mean, part of the news, right, is what's new, what's happening right now, and so this is where I do some kind of. Some people have found this section a little bit hard to follow, but I think it's interesting. The kind of history of how we got a chronological universal standard calendar. Which is, the church's fault to try to date Easter, but then it gets, it becomes a way of imagining the world, and folks like
reification of time in one sense, right?
Yeah, folks like George Grant or others have talked about how, in many ways, this kind of Whiggish progressive notion of history, where what is further along chronologically is also further along morally somehow, is a sort of, again, an Illichian bastard child of a Christian account that something new has happened in the world with the incarnation. Something new can occur. But a Christian account of time does not privilege some sort of linear arc, right? It's not like the arc of history bends toward justice or something. The Christian notion of kairos time centers significance around the person and work of Christ. And so trying to inhabit that framework of time, and I think the liturgical year is really, if not necessary, at least certainly helpful in that regard, but probably necessary. Mm-hmm. Trying to inhabit a kind of kairos cycle of the work and life of Christ, and then slotting the events of the day into that time scale, time arc, rather than thinking what's happening right now must be more important than what happened yesterday.
Brilliant. And Michael, I think, well, first of all, Jeff, kudos to you that both when you're writing about attention, it makes one think of Simone Weil and her the right use of attention in school studies and so forth. But when you're writing about time and belonging, I'd say what you're doing consistently is emphasizing the eschatological dimension. There's always a background in which we can see these things as something of a subset, right, and not just be swimming in them, and again, reifying them.
That's right.
And so that notion of some type of introducing people to the leaven, the eighth day, some type of eschatological dimension is going to be crucial. And I think your book, you carry that through, and I think it's probably understated for how brilliantly it's done. And so Michael, your thoughts on Kairos and Chronos in your work with the liturgical year. Why are you always having these festivals?
Well, because I think when
he's single-handedly renewing the festival year.
Well,
Amen. We need that.
I think when the church year became divorced from the agricultural year, we lost a lot.
Yeah.
That's and I think there's a tremendous impoverishment. And I think that we were talking the disconnection that we can see in our students, for instance, or in young people or people. I think they're looking for that. And I think that connection they're trying to find is, as Jeff mentioned earlier, they try to find through the internet or through social media, because at least it's somebody I can talk to, but it's not, it takes a while before you realize it's not real. And that when you have these embodied practices, that it's beautifully connects people. So we had I don't know how many people we had here, maybe 40 or 50, maybe, but a lot of kids, which was nice. But it was, it's kind of you've been here before, Mike. It's really laid back. Really, it's pretty chill experience, but it's festival, and you're outside, you're having dinner in a barn with a bunch of other people, and people were, the kids were all playing hide and seek and stuff like this. So it was very festive, and it's very much, I think it's very much an inspiration. If you've seen that series, Tudor Monastery Farm, which was
I still haven't seen it. Yeah.
It's really worth looking at, because they go through the whole year and they show how the church year was so connected to the agricultural year and everything else. But I think what it does, though, and people might think it's quaint, but it's not quaint. It's healing.
Yeah.
It's healing. It connects people to what's real, and the thing is, it connects people to is the supernatural by the church year,
eschatological, yeah.
But also to the world of creation, because you're doing things because certain things happen at this time of the year, like when we celebrate May Day or 12th night or whatever. But also doing those two things brings human beings together in the same space to be human together. And actually we sang a couple of tunes. We sang Meet on the Ledge. Do you know that song by Fairport Convention?
I don't know it.
Which is it's a kind of a lament about losing friends, because we're getting to that time of the year. But also we sang our theme song, The Wind and the Rain. And there were some other things we sang as well. I can't remember what they were, but those kinds, and this is kind of like Waldorf teaching 101. Why do you teach children to sing? Because it's beautiful? No, because you're teaching them to breathe. And then when people sing together, like in church, right, you're breathing together at the same time. And and that's what the year is. The year is a breathing, both the liturgical year and the agricultural year. It's a breathing, right? It's a breathing out and a breathing in. So starting at St. John's, the in-breath begins, which completes then at Christmas. And then there's a slow out-breath. And you can see this reflected in nature, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. So, and how can recalibrating yourself, and it's a horrible mechanical word to use, but how could that, having us, reunite ourselves with those cycles, with those rhythms, not be healthy? And just think about it, Mary Harrington's book, which I have right here, and she talks about what a dreadful thing the introduction of the pill was for women, because it took them out of nature. I mean, and what do you think liturgical year A, B, and C does? It also takes the liturgical year out of nature. And I love, like I told you before, Mike, I have this old Masses and Offices book in Latin still, probably from the 30s. Well, where the church year was marked not by the date, but by the feast days. In fact, just Michaelmas, right? That's when in England there's still a palimpsest of this, where the college term that begins at the end of September is called Michaelmas term.
Yep.
In England to this day. And they still retain a sense of that. And if you read Saint Teresa of Avila, right? She doesn't say, well, it took about 3 minutes or it took 2 minutes. She says it took about the time of a creed, or it took about the time of a Pater Noster, right? And we lost that. So, and how do we, and I think we know that through that breathing, which is what is meditation and prayer, but also what kind of breathing, where we become reunited to the world. And the world is both the creation and the nature and supernature.
Yeah, I think that's so right. And it's so, so many people today have become alienated from those cycles. And the replacement is the kind of 24/7 news cycle. But that tells you that tells time in a fundamentally unhuman or inhuman way.
Mm-hmm. I've hope in one sense, and it might be misplaced, but I do have it. And it's with like the young people post-COVID with this a little bit. Because I was thinking that, and Jeff, your observations having written this book and teaching at university where we're all fathers, they say young people don't trust the institutions. Well, I don't think they do. I think that's a pretty good way of sizing them up. There's certainly true believers left. But with regards to the news cycle, they say, like, when you spin a color wheel too fast, eventually it becomes gray, right? All we're seeing is gray. And that this tribalism of the news, that our community is downstream from our news preferences. So we might just use the two political tribes or something. No. Do you too feel a little bit of hope that this kind of great hatred of hypocrisy that's going on with young people, their quickness to pick up on this type of thing, are you seeing it? Do you think it relates to maybe a sense of breaking free from the news in that bad way?
Yeah, I think the challenge there is just, I agree. The challenge then is to offer them, when they're hungry, offer them a real alternative they can sink their teeth into, because otherwise they just become sort of disenchanted and cynical and kind of check out. Like if it's all a show and it's all fake, I might as well just stream TikTok videos and Netflix or something. Mm-hmm. So I think that's my worry, right? That you go from kind of intense, institutionalized political or cultural tribalism, and you realize the hypocrisy, and then you just revert into a kind of individualistic, endless amusement. Mm-hmm. But I think there's definitely a moment there, and it's now when students and young people are hungry for an alternative. And if you can offer that, then they're receptive, and they think, oh, there is an alternative here. That's why there's a real hunger for liturgy in different church traditions right now, right? People who have grown up without that want liturgy. They want liturgical year or a church service that follows some kind of pattern. So I think if you can channel those recognitions in the right direction, then there's real opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said.
I think so, but I also think, well, if I look at the students I've had over the last 5 years, very small percentage fit that description. But there are some that do, right? It's not going to be universal.
You're saying all of them are zoning out on TikTok?
Well, most of them.
Yeah, Grove City is going to be different from where you're teaching.
Most of them, but most of them, yeah. Hillsdale, I'm sure it's the ratio is flipped. But there are still students out there who catch it, right? Because, and I think they catch it because I'm probably one of the few professors there, or in most mainstream institutions, who lets it be okay to challenge the narrative, or to think, I really tell them, I'm trying to get you to think for yourself, not to think like me. And so many of my colleagues are trying to get them to think like them.
But all this, even this addiction to TikTok, I had to speak on behalf of campus ministry to a council last week. And I guess I thought I was speaking the obvious, but letting people know as the campus ministry year started up, here's the deal. Like, when you're approaching somebody and you see a girl whose hair is green and she's supporting an environmental cause that you think is one step too far, or for the other side, if you see a rad trad and he's all dressed up and kind of in cosplay and so forth, what you're going to do is you're going to ignore that, and you're going to ask them like, hey, how you doing? And you're going to ask them how their family is. Like, is their family doing well in particular? Because undoubtedly somebody in their family is not doing well. There's not a family in America. And cool, right? Good news and bad news. The bad news was that seemed like news to everybody. But the good news was they all bought it. And then step 2 in that, Michael, is those same people, sure, they need classes that help them wake up to even further the process that they're doing on their own, is seeing through everything. But you too, and I know you're good at this. It's this is evangelization now. It's just going to individual people and saying, what Simone Weil, open the doors. What are you going through? What are you going through? This is the only use of attention. This is the beginning and the end. That's heaven and so forth. But, this same addiction to TikTok that Jeff makes very clear, and you do, all it means is that anybody listening to this podcast can get involved in this complete reversal we're talking about, but finding a young person is asking them how they are doing, right?
Well, plus I should say that we had a couple of my students at Michaelmas.
Yeah, I bet.
So that was good. And we've had a few in the past come as well. Well, and that's one of the things, right? Is make them, invite them, right? Hospitality.
Right. Yeah, to be part of something.
But the other thing I was going to say is, the other part of the equation is we live in a culture where people who do those kinds of things, once the archons get wind of it, start to be talked about as, they're disparaged by,
I think they're right on that.
Labels,
I think
right?
you're right.
They're fringe right, or whatever, they're fringe theologian, or whatever they, or they're homophobes, or they're whatever, they're phobes, right? But when you saw that with the trucker we were talking about, because I think you see these grass movements like the trucker convoy thing, right? A couple of years ago, and where it was, what I thought was beautiful about it, it was not political, it was grassroots, and there were people from every demographic and persuasion in those protests. Yet the government's tack was to label them all as Nazis. This is actually before Justin Trudeau,
and there was real neighborliness going on in that thing. Yeah.
But where people get disparaged by those kinds of those buzzwords, and people don't even want to investigate it. In fact, I was talking about this with the class today, because I'm trying to get them to think critically about everything. And we're talking a lot about social media and how we are conditioned by it. Just like, how what an effective tool for propaganda that is, because all you need to do is get a little bit of an emotional investment triggered, and triggered is probably a great word, that will actually can derail, and it derails these, or it can derail these engagements with the real. And I think this is one of the things that has kind of made me mad about what happened at Rod Dreher. He was so attacked. I mean, I didn't agree with everything he was writing in his book, but I thought he was, he had a good attitude. And when he did, what's it called?
Benedict option.
The Benedict option. But people, man, they just wanted him to fall. They wanted him to fall there. And there was, you've probably seen it, not only for him, but there are a lot of people, most of whom write for Pathos Catholic, who just I don't know, it seems like they hate everybody. You know what I mean? And it creates this kind of mob, which is just weird. I mean, because we wouldn't think about forming a mob. but they have these mobs out there, and ostensibly Catholic or Christian mobs who just have such vitriol. Oh, remember, and the thing is, what they went after Jordan Peterson early on. I mean, Jordan Peterson, I don't agree with everything he says either, but I know a lot of kids are attracted to him, and I understand why.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a great gateway drug. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't feel. I mean, when the whole thing blew up with him, with all these Catholics from Pathos Catholic jumping all over him, I'm like, and somebody asked me to write an article about him, and all I had to say was, as far as I can tell, he's just doing the things that professors are supposed to do. Ask you to question your assumptions about things and look at things maybe from a different perspective. That's not, why is that controversial?
Yeah, because people get their buzz of community by banding together with their fellow critics and forming these mobs, these swarms. And those kinds of communities never build things, they only destroy things.
Yeah.
And so it's not a real community.
In fact, I don't know if you saw it, Mike. John Michael Greer came up with a blog post today about magic, and he used Donald Trump as an example. How all people had, they were just investing so much hate and energy into him, which only propelled him to greater attention, right?
My thing is, again, all these antis, that racism, super bad. Anti-racism, I don't know, it gets really weird. Trump, not a good guy. Anti-Trumpism, the weakest intellectual edifice ever to hang a worldview on. But all anti-communism, that was John Lukács things. Communism, not a great thing. It's drifting your whole worldview, as now a lot of young Jordan Peterson fans do. Yep. When it's communism or cultural Marxism, then it goes too far. But Jeff, on a hopeful note too, as we wind up, you mentioned in your book a different type of news that kind of sprung up in two very reputable. It was great in both cases. Both are local to Rochester, New York, because Dorothy Day spent time at the Abbey of the Genesee, and Frederick Douglass, spent a long time here. But a type of newspaper that interests me a lot, do you see a modern iteration of it? But they develop newspapers in a completely different way. Say that role in your book, and tell us if you see a different, hopeful way of a news thing today.
Yeah, I mean, I do think news plays a key role in our lives. Like, I don't think it's totally always bad, but it needs to be reoriented, right? So that's flowing out of our communities rather than flowing from the top and infecting our community. So we can no longer enjoy going to church with people because we think they're wrong about something. So yeah, I looked at in different, previous generations, obviously, folks like Douglass and Day as examples of those who gathered real community and built their publications around embodied community, especially Dorothy Day with the Catholic Worker. I mean, the only thing that's like that today I can think of is the Bruderhof and Plow. Yeah. But their publication flows out of their life together. I just had a book that Plow published, and I was at a book launch event with a bunch of them this weekend. They're just such great people. They love each other. They love Jesus, and they want to spread ideas. That's why they publish stuff. But it flows from prior commitments, and I think that is so important.
Was Susanna there?
Absolutely.
That's my girl.
Susanna Black.
Susanna Black. Check it out.
She's talented.
So I just think
the night at her house once upon a time.
She's at the center of a lot of social networks, isn't she?
She is a dynamo.
Yeah,
she really is.
So I think there's networks that are small, and I think that there's a lot of small magazines still that don't have big subscriber bases, but have real influence nonetheless. And
do you see something equivalent online that's kind of like something could be burgeoning? Not to say young people don't read Front Porch, but something that
I don't know. I mean, I think the blogosphere in the early 2000s had more possibilities. It's really tough now with social media. I feel like the things that get spread are usually pretty shallow.
Yeah,
but there's definitely pockets.
Well, and I think Substack in some.
Yeah, that's true.
And the thing is, what happened? The reason I started a Substack is because I was getting my reach limited by Google and those guys for
sure.
I was engaging some disallowed topics on my blog, and it was like all of a sudden my reach went way down. Like, this is not right.
Yeah.
This is in the years when I was getting restricted by Facebook on a regular basis. But the other thing I was gonna ask you, Jeff, is so my mom's cousin was the publisher of the Detroit Free Press here in Michigan, Detroit, and he worked his way up from copy boy to the top of the chain at the paper. But that was a different era, right? This is the era when there was such a thing as local journalism, right? And this is something might be invisible almost to us now, that kind of local investigative journalism has all but disappeared.
It's a big interest of Jeff's too, so I know he
Yeah.
probably,
I mean, it's a problem, right? All the ad dollars left the local papers and went to Google, Facebook, Instagram. And so they just collapsed. And I think it's bad. There are interesting models. Speaking of Substack, there's some interesting online models that are kind of citizen journalism, right? Where you don't have the money anymore. But there's these opportunities for people to go to town hall meetings, do some, try to talk to some people and publish. So I take a little bit of comfort from that. It's not the same as like a professional journalist team dedicated to your town. I mean, it is so hard for me to get information about what's going on with, like, for instance, this sand and gravel pit happening a few miles from my house. There's these community meetings, but it's like there's no reporter that's actually going to follow up and do the legwork because there's no reporter. So that is a real problem. I could not care less, about the 90,000 reporters telling me who's going to be the next Speaker of the House of Representatives. I want to know what's going to go down in the sand and gravel pit in my neighborhood. But all the reporters, all the incentives are to talk about national stories. So that's a real problem. And I think no one's got the solution to it yet. But I do take some hope in this kind of citizen journalism movement.
Well, I think what happened because of that, people are oblivious to what's going on in their own communities.
Yeah.
And not only that, I mean, I think there's truth to this, that, I didn't realize till just recently how profound this was. But, when they talk about like George Soros money, for instance, flowing into local elections, I would like, oh yeah, like Detroit. No, it's actually little towns.
Yeah.
And for instance, the town right next to us, Stockbridge, Michigan. So we get their newspaper, and it's just usually just crap about the
league and stuff,
whatever, right? But when they had an election and elected a new supervisor. He doesn't even live here. He doesn't even live in this county. He lives in Ann Arbor. So that tells you all you need to know about him.
Yeah.
But he has no relationship to the people of this county. Absolutely not. And where we live, I'm in Jackson County. That's in Ingham County. It's rural. People are tend to be conservative, family, church-going people. And this guy comes in. I don't even know where he came from or how he got elected, and why he would want to be elected in this little cow town. It's a very small town, maybe a population of 10,000. But I think that's what happens, and I think the archons, or this beast that we don't know we're fighting, it kind of works to subvert the very sensibilities and practices we are trying to encourage, right? Yeah. And we don't know it's there. Like, what's his name? The homeschool guy, John Taylor
Gatto.
Yeah, Gatto. Now, he was right. I mean, he talked about it, and I see it happening here, and I'm sure you see it too, where you are, Jeff, that what happens is these smarmy real estate agents get themselves elected to the municipal board, and they change the zoning laws. Then people raise the taxes. Our taxes went up $1,000 last year, and then people can no longer afford to pay these taxes on these big farms, and they're forced to sell to a subdivision in its enclosure, right? And this is what happens when we don't know what's going on at the local level.
Yeah, I mean, there are real consequences for that kind of absence of a place for the community to talk to itself. Yeah.
You know, the where, you know, and we'll kind of wind up here, and we began, Bill Kaufman's name was mentioned, but I think the first article I ever read in Chronicles by Bill Kaufman, I don't think it was the first he wrote, and I'm forgetting the name now, but it was an early editor, if not the founder of Rochester's paper, but it was during the World War I years. And so it was a local newspaper, and this guy thought America's entry into World War I was wrong. You know, and I remember the insight from Bill was that, like, even then, this isn't new. The federal government wanted to tarnish this guy as, you know, backwards, evil, wrong, hatred of freedom. But because he was local, everybody knew in Rochester, he was always walking the streets and everything. And everybody in Rochester said, no, he's a great guy, really good guy, pays his taxes, just kind to everybody he meets. And that notion of nowadays in an uprooted culture, if you have the crowd that gangs up on you, whether it's the Patreon, you know, what's your bet noir, Michael? The Catholic crowd that you said gangs up.
Oh, the Patheos Catholic.
Patheos crowd. I was going to say Patreon. I know it's but so
The
whichever one it
Bellyaches.
is, you know, and that's but again, it was how news, when people knew you, you know, when it becomes disembedded, you're more like open to these attacks that come from nowhere, tarnishing your character. So this is great. You know, Jeff, again, left unsaid because it's one of Michael's favorite topics. We've done it many times. Who'd we recently do it with, Michael, that was so brilliant? The guy who wrote the book on Shakespeare and Christianity, Lee Ozer. But it was on higher ed. So we'll have to have you on sometime to talk about Windleberry and higher ed and those things.
Yeah, that's a perennial topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And again, you found your place at Grove City. They treat you well, I hope.
Yeah, I'm very, very grateful to be here.
Yeah, and I know you have a website, so I'm going to link that in our comments section. Jeff, tell people how to get your books. You know, I'll link your website, and I'll link to Front Porch Republic. And how can they find your stuff?
Yeah, it's all there. Or their local bookstore if they have one left.
Okay, right. All right. JeffBilbro.com. So thanks for joining us, Jeff. Thanks for all you do for Front Porch. That's not a highly paid job.
That's
in
right.
fact, it's not for, yeah.
Well, I hope, thank you. And I hope that sometime we'll get a FPR conference up in upstate New York again or something. And
yeah, I hosted one with Bill Kaufman in Genesis.
When is the conference coming up? What are the dates?
October 20 and 21st, I think.
Okay.
Sold out, Michael. Yeah.
Well, remember we talked to Paul Kingsnorth sometime last year.
Yeah.
And it was a little iffy if he'd be able to make
it.
Yeah.
He's coming with his wife and 2 kids. And
that's great.
I think it's the first time, at least for most of his family, to be in the States. So
really?
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'll be super excited. Well, I'm sure that's going to go well. Yep. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Regeneration Podcast. We'll see you next week.